Welcome to Season 5 of She Ventures. I am your host, Doria Lavanino. She Ventures is a podcast about women and their work and life pivots. I believe in the power of storytelling. I also believe that if you change one woman's life, you start to change a family or a community. Our mission is to elevate the diverse stories of everyday women in their work. One promise, no mansplaining ever. Sit back, listen, and hit subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us at sheventurespodcast.com. It's not every day that I sit down with a woman who has worked at the United Nations and at the World Bank and earned her MBA and a master's degree in public policy from Oxford. She also served as the youngest member of Mongolia's government. She founded a company called Girls Code, and she did all of this before she turned 30. While in government, she crafted a 4-year plan to transform Mongolia into a digital nation and introduced an E-Mongolia platform that currently offers over 1,300 online services to citizens. And she has gotten some notoriety as to her accomplishments. She was named a New Generation Leader by Time Magazine and a Forbes 30 Under 30 in Asia. Bolor-Erdene Battsengel, welcome to She Ventures.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for making time. Can you start by describing your childhood and how it influenced you to become a passionate advocate for digital access?
So I was born in a very small town in Mongolia. If anyone who do not have enough information about Mongolia, Mongolia is a country sandwiched by Russia and China in Central Asia, and it's a country which kept its tradition with nomadic culture. And I still do have my relatives living as nomads in the countryside. So I was born into a family who lived in the countryside, and then we moved to the city when I was around 10 years old. When I came to the city, I remember being bullied a lot coming from countryside because there is a lot of difference between children being educated in the city and children being educated in the countryside. I spent so much time studying very hard, reading books, and I was able to skip 3 years in my middle school and high school just because I was a nerd.
It's good to be a nerd. You don't realize it in high school, right? But then when you get older, you realize.
Yes, exactly. And I finished my high school when I was 14, finished my undergrad when I was 18. I have most of my life, most of my career, I have been the youngest person in the room. Most of the room, especially in the government, only women in the room. So yeah, that's a brief story of my life.
I did not know that fact about you, that you had finished your undergraduate degree by the time you were 18. So it makes me wonder, do you often find that how should I say this, that you're one step ahead of people? Or how has that been for you? How has that manifested?
I think just along the way, I learned to compare myself with myself rather than others, because I have always been different from others. And I think one of the qualities I learned is to see good in people, like what are the skills, what I need to learn from them. So usually I compare myself with myself rather than other people. So I don't really feel different, but just a few days ago, I was talking to my friends and realized I've led very different life from my friends compared to their lives, and just normal childhood, normal career.
As you mentioned, you came from a rural area. What was the driving force behind you deciding to focus on international education and becoming instrumental both in government and public policy?
I was very lucky to start off my career with international organization, which is Asian Development Bank, right after I finished my undergraduate degree. And then I got to learn about international development and also became very judgmental of international organizations and their implementation in countries like Mongolia, which they need, but a lot of organizations spend millions of dollars, but not having real impact on the ground. So I have seen many projects not only being implemented in Mongolia, but many developing countries not having positive impact or the impact that we would expect. So I became very critical about these things, which led me to further study these issues, development issues. I did a lot of work in rural development in Mongolia. I did a lot of work in Australia, in the US, even in Samoa Island with the World Bank. So I got to learn different pieces of international development.
What would you say are the common themes among, because you're right, there is this tendency to throw millions or even billions of dollars at a problem or infrastructure building, and oftentimes it doesn't have the impact that it was intended to. In your opinion, from what you've seen, what do you think are the biggest factors for why these projects fail?
There are a lot of different issues, including the government's involvement and if the government is active to implement this project successfully in their countries, or if there might be corruption issues. Many countries do have corruption issues. But I think it's very important to learn the real life in these countries and communities. So usually international community try to bring one experience from other countries, which was a successful case. But then when it gets translated in the other country, it doesn't match the culture, it doesn't match the reality. So a lot of projects fail because they have lack of knowledge or because they refuse to learn about the lives and the culture of the country that they're implementing the project in.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of, and I want to talk about you, but it does remind me of an organization I'm familiar with called World Connect. And one of the things that they do is they see themselves as stepping in and helping get a project started. But also the community members, I think, pay a very small percentage so that they have skin in the game, so to speak. And then it's really about them getting it off the ground. And so I wonder if, based on what you've said, if that's a way of ensuring that projects are meeting the needs of the people that they're trying to reach.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's important to learn what are the differences and what are the similarities between countries, communities, even small groups.
Absolutely. So you are responsible for leading the project of ensuring that Mongolians have access to the internet when you were acting minister of the Ministry of Digital Development. And my understanding is you are the youngest and the only woman who has been in the position, or in the government, also the youngest in the government. How did you convince your colleagues, which I would imagine are mostly male, to invest in a technological infrastructure? Did you get a lot of pushback, or were they open to it? How did that work?
There are several factors in this, and I joined the government in 2020. And the reason actually I joined the government was to implement a project called E-Mongolia, which is an e-governance project to help our citizens get government service on their phones, on their laptops. And usually our citizens, especially in nomadic communities, would have to spend hours just to get to the government service facilities. So it has been a challenge for them, and many people were not able to get very simple government service. And it is a big digital inclusion problem, not only in Mongolia, everywhere. Even I can see some statistics from US or some European countries as well. And when we started the E-Mongolia Project in 2020, one of my priorities were digital inclusion. So rather than just like trying to give the benefit to citizens who are living in the city already, who would have easy access, we more focused on the people who are living as nomads, living in disadvantaged, underprivileged communities, and women especially in this sense. We were very lucky in a way because of the pandemic. We used the pandemic to promote E-Mongolia, and especially when we had series of lockdowns. One of the campaigns we ran was it's called Run Your Errands with the Government during the pandemic. And a lot of people started using E-Mongolia when they were in pandemic. And we introduced services that are free online, but if you go to the office, then it's not free. There is a charge. We used different encouragement, engagements, any promotional things on this to actively advertise E-Mongolia. So one of the approaches we pursued was usually government is very bureaucratic. So especially when a citizen goes to the government, there is very typical red bureaucracy that is being expected. When we launched E-Mongolia, we used it as a product, as a private sector product. And how do you promote the product? Within a year, we gained almost 80% of the adult population as users. So far, I think 95% of Mongolian adult population using E-Mongolia as well.
95% of the people?
95%.
That's incredible. It's probably better than the US.
And just getting simple service like getting your passport would take hours to stand in a queue and then waiting time, and you have to come back to pick up the passport, stand in the queue for several more hours. Now you can just order your passport in 3 minutes, have it delivered to your home or office. Yeah, then people started seeing the easy way of doing things and started using it actively and recommending it to their families and friends.
That's great. To see the benefits and then to have that word of mouth referral, which doesn't cost you anything, right? And people are liking it, which makes perfect sense to me. How is gender perceived in Mongolia, and what would you say are the biggest challenges generally of women and girls?
Gender issue in Mongolia is very interesting. Traditionally, it's very male-dominated. But if you see the statistics of number of girls graduating from high school, number of women finishing master's degree, number of women holding PhD or doctorate degree is much higher than the men. And traditionally, men are encouraged to pursue their family business, which is agriculture or live animal husbandry, etc., etc. So for men, there are several cases where their education is left out because they had to pursue and keep their family business or family culture, while women are sent off to good education. But on the other hand, when you see private sector and public sector and decision-making level, the percentage of women in power and decision-making roles is very, very small. I was one of the first women to lead ICT sector in Mongolia. I was the first female state secretary of digital development, first vice minister, one of the youngest. And these things do not make me proud, but it's an equality issue. And one of the things I always emphasize is that, we have a lot of problems in the world. We have gender inequality, we have education inequality, we have income inequality. But I think technology and internet can have a way to help solving these issues. But on the other hand, the biggest problem is digital inclusion. If there is no digital inclusion, then there is an inequality gap is getting bigger and bigger to the point that we cannot solve anymore.
You raise such an interesting and complex issue when you talk about women becoming educated, yet that not translating to them holding managerial or executive roles. What do you believe happens then? Because it's not a pipeline issue, clearly, right? There are educated women. Why do you think it happens?
One, there is a traditional mindset to support men in the executive or managerial, in political case, decision-making or powerful positions. Two, women being supportive of each other is real life issue. And when March 8th comes, everybody talks about it and forgets.
Perfunctory.
Yeah. So it's a real issue. And I don't think we have built a successful culture on that yet around the world, not only in developing countries, but around the world. And, even women prefer men over women. And it becomes a bit of issue. And another thing is, I think the concept of feminism and human rights, the understanding has turned into a wrong turn. Like we talked about it way too much and then not acting on it properly. Especially in political sense, it's very competitive because there is very few slots for women. But women never fight for more slots for more women. But they fight over one slot and just have a big competition on that. I think it's about creating the culture, building the culture, creating balanced understanding around the world.
It's so interesting because this is the second interview I've done today. And the first was with an American woman. And she raised the same issue of that sometimes it's actually not, it's women who are not supporting other women or are competing with other women. And really, if that mindset can be changed to one of collaboration and inclusivity, I know it sounds easy to say, not as easy maybe to implement, especially when people are surviving. But just interesting to me that I've heard that now twice today from different places in the world. In an interview that you did with the Associated Press, you described what it was like for you being a young woman in government. So I'm going to read what it says. It says, when I worked in government, it was typical that I would get a question asking me like, oh, whose assistant are you? Or like, are you here to work as a waitress? Whenever you see a young woman, it's the stereotype. And even from the public, it's an unusual image. Then I got a lot of cyberbullying from old male politicians because they would see me as a competitor. That's loaded. Like, how did you handle those situations? That must have been difficult.
The time since I joined the government, the biggest problem has always been this stereotype. But on the other hand, I enjoyed so much for creating E-Mongolia, leading the Digital Nation project, because I can see with my team, we're creating impact and we are changing the culture and we're ensuring digital inclusion in the country. This was the best part. But what comes with this is this politics and the public judgment and the media and most importantly, misinformation and cyberbullying along with that. I have been writing a academic paper on misinformation and cyberbullying towards women in public, not only women in politics, but in the media, in social media influencers, celebrities, because women get much more bullying and harassment online rather than men. And for Mongolia's case, from my personal experience, there hasn't been many young women in such high position. And I always respect the trust that was given to me to be in these positions. And I really worked hard to prove and to protect and to create as much as I can in these positions. But again, I can't emphasize enough that it's very important to create equality, especially in a place like government, or which is an institution which is supposed to create inequality legally or executively. So it was a big challenge for me, to the point that it became just so unhealthy to continue working there. I had the choice whether to sink in the system. So you have a choice. You can sink into the system. You can be one of them. You can be part of the big system and just be quiet. But what we want is a change. What we want is equality. What we want is improvement in this case. I really wanted to talk about these things, and I have a lot of young women, young girls reaching out to me and asking or trying to follow my footsteps, joining the government. And I thought it's my responsibility to share what's the reality, because it can look all glamorous or all fancy to outside. But it's very important to bring out the reality and the facts. And the facts are sadly these stereotypes, this mindset, and trying to push women down, especially considering if you're a young woman, then you need to do this, you need to do that. So we have to change, yeah.
There's an assumption that you don't know, right?
Yes.
It's a weird kind of age discrimination, because as a woman in her 50s, that's, I think, how typically people think of age discrimination as older people. But it happens to young people just as much, that there's an assumption that you don't have experience, or that you're not qualified, or you don't know what you're talking about, none of which is actually based in fact. And the second thing I just wanted to mention is, it's so true about women being bullied on the internet, and this whole kind of cancel culture, and the idea that you can actually say something well-intentioned and have it be distorted in such a way that it wasn't even what you had originally meant. And yet your career could be over because of that, because someone wants it to be. That's a lot to go through. How did you find strength in those moments?
Most of the time I try to stick with my goal and just hoping that this will pass, but I have to deliver. It's like I have to improve E-Mongolia, or I have to do a lot of things to make Mongolia a digital nation, or help Mongolia to become a digital nation. A lot of the times I stick to my goals, but sometimes it got a bit too much, the cyberbullying, and the worst thing about the internet is that if there can be organized groups, trolls, bots, who can be hired, and you can cut like 10 seconds of video and then distribute those things. And that's exactly what happened to me. They cut the video of me speaking in a conference and then kind of put everything together. And then they had hired big troll teams, bot teams to attack me, all these things. So it's the reality of internet on the negative side, and it's very important for governments, international organizations, NGOs, and especially tech companies to be very actively on this. Because most of the tech companies like Meta or Twitter, they do have a channel that you can report. But by the time you get your problem solved, it's already gone on the internet viral. So there is no way you can help. In my case, it was a political attack, which is not the worst case. But the worry is that a lot of teenager girls, teenager boys, a lot of children are being attacked, and it's actually leading to physical harm. It's a big issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really sorry that happened to you. That's really, truly, it's horrible. So if you were to give listeners that are mostly women for this podcast 3 tips to stand out as leaders, even when they're facing adversity, what would they be?
The biggest thing I would say is to be brave. And a lot of women do have responsibilities with their families, or they are more avoiding risk because of their children or because they think about other things. And everywhere women are not good at putting themselves first. So it's very important to be brave on this sense. And I think also me not having family, not being a mom yet or a wife yet, I cannot pressure enough that a lot of moms and single moms do a great job in everywhere they go. But it's very important to stand out for yourself and be brave and speak out. And the second thing would be courageous. And third thing would be hardworking. And hardworking is very important, but just hardworking alone is not enough, because a lot of success has to come with some luck and good timing and some bravery.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. My father used to say that to me, and it would upset me a little bit because I was like, no, like if you work hard, you should everything should move perfectly for you. And he said, no, at least in his life, that yes, he worked hard, but it was also being sometimes at the right place at the right time, recognizing opportunities. And there was a little bit, in his opinion, of luck. Those are factors that maybe people can't control for as much. But the hard work, I do think, is important. So let's go to your current project, which is Girls Code. So talk to me about how you started it and how did the idea evolve kind of from a concept to a project and to an NGO?
I have 2 hats. One is Girls Coding. Another is I'm working as a research fellow at the Blavatnik School of Government in the University of Oxford, focusing on public digital infrastructure. And going back to Girls Coding, me coming from the countryside and nomadic communities, I was traditionally encouraged to become an accountant if I'm good at math, or a lawyer, or the best would be economist, and never encouraged to pursue IT degrees or ICT or STEM. And I thought that just happened in my generation. And then I got to work with a lot of educational organizations in Mongolia when I was working in the government. And I saw the statistics, and it's extremely low number of women in ICT sector and extremely low number of students who are interested in studying computer science or software engineering, especially this time where all tech profession has become one of the best earning, well-paid jobs in the world. And I got to explore a bit more and realized that it didn't change from my generation. Still, a lot of girls are encouraged to become an accountant, which now could be replaced by AI or technology. And I saw some statistics in Mongolia on tech executives, and almost 90% of them are men. And even when you see like big corporations, international tech companies, you see the statistics, it might say 45, 55. But if you see the roles, most of the low-skilled jobs are filled by women, like secretaries, accountants, or cleaning service. And most of the decision-making and managerial executive jobs are filled by men. And I keep looking at these things, and maybe these companies hire one or two women in the executive position, but they put them in front of the company and do a lot of marketing on that as if it's all equal and everything is solved. So every time I look at these things, I get very critical, and I wanted to change it as much as I could in my small capacity. And we started Girls Coding in 2020, and so far we have about 80 graduates. We bring girls from nomadic communities, disabled, underprivileged communities, and teach them coding skills, advanced English, even admission process. So we have several girls studying in Ivy League schools, universities around the world, and a lot of girls working as part-time coder and reinvesting the money they earned to their education because they come from disadvantaged communities. So this is a very small initiative, but we can see enormous impact on this one.
And so are you doing this work through Oxford University? Is it involved in some way with this work, or is it separate?
No, it's two separate projects I'm working on, yeah.
And when you're looking for girls to be in the program, do they apply, or is there outreach on your part? How does that work?
So we announce the admissions, and the admission is actually very complicated. It's 8 steps. We take exams, 4 exams and 4 interviews with the girls, with their parents, even with their teachers, because it's very competitive. So we get, for like 50 slots, we get 5,000 applications, which is a very high number. And the biggest challenge for us is to bring the right girls. It's a 3-month boot camp and then a few months followed by online curriculum. And for 3 months, everybody has to study for 12 hours a day, which is a very intense.
That's a lot, yeah.
So for us to identify the girls who can be hardworking and who can be inspiring and more active, it's very important for us. So the admission process is a very complex and comprehensive process for us.
Is it free for the girls?
Yeah, it's completely free.
I was also wondering, what kind of coding do you teach? Is it HTML, CSS, Java? There are so many different kinds. How do you decide on what you teach?
We bring teachers from National University of Mongolia, science universities, and this year we are also working with International University of Applied Science from Germany. We teach them basics and the concept of computer science, followed by Java, Python. And then once you pass that step, you can choose what you want to learn and then divide into groups, depending on your interest.
So that's like the fundamentals is they're learning, and then they have like electives that they can specialize.
Yeah. And in the end of the program, everybody has to work on their own project, which is to create an app or a website or any product. And this is the part I get excited about a lot. Because last year, the girls created the game. They created an app that sends alarm to their friends when they're feeling down or when they're feeling sad or unsafe. So this kind of things come from their problem, and they try to solve their problem with technology, and it's very inspiring to see.
Incredibly inspiring. And I had never thought about this, but you're right. Solving their problems, not things that might matter to me or to you even, right? But things that they're dealing with every day, and using technology. That's where I would imagine the best ideas are going to come from. What is your, I guess, dream for, no, dream makes it sound like it's not going to happen. What are the next steps that you're going to take with this NGO? Do you want to grow it?
We are extremely passionate about expanding the initiative, the curriculum, to other countries. And we have done extensive studies on similar programs around the world. And for sure, it's not enough. There isn't enough initiatives. And especially very, very low number of initiatives like this in developing communities. We're looking at potential opportunities to expand the program to different countries, do some pilot, exercise some toolkits.
Where would you want to expand to, do you think?
Potentially, I think the place which needs a program like this the most is developing countries or emerging markets. In Central Asia, even in Latin America, even some parts of Europe. So we are just juggling with the idea for now.
And lastly, I wanted to ask you about funding. So my understanding is that you were able to raise venture funds that are typical for ESG funding. Is that right?
Yeah. So for the past 2-3 years, it was more local companies sponsoring. And from this year, we're looking at international communities, international organizations, or bigger companies as a sponsor, as a potential sponsor. So anybody watching this and willing to contribute to programs like this, which creates enormous impact in different communities, feel free to reach out.
And on that note, can you tell listeners where they can find out more about the school and you and anything else that you want to draw attention to?
We have a website, girlscode.mn, and we have enough information. And if you send us an email, we'll reply instantly, so we can start off from there.
Fantastic. I am really thankful for you coming on She Ventures today to share your journey. And I hope that maybe we can catch up a year from now and see what progress you've made.
That would be my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to She Ventures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.